What happens when a tenant needs an emergency fix in the middle of the night? Do you have a story to share? A toilet overflowing? Something like that. What happens?
Yeah, that's a great question, Melissa. I think the first step when you ask that question is to know, for everybody to know what's an emergency, right? And I think people use that word too loosely. And, it's nice to make sure you define for yourself as a landlord and for the residents, hey, these are emergencies. Like, what's an emergency? Emergency is no power. That's for sure an emergency, right? No
Mhm.
heat in the winter, an emergency. No, no water, an emergency, right?
A cockroach, not an emergency.
Emergency, right?
Right.
Broken kitchen cabinet door,
Not an
not an
emergency.
emergency, right?
Mhm.
A crack in something, not an emergency, right? But for certain people, and we all know why, certain people are like, look, everything's got to be in a certain place, and to me, it's an emergency if everything is not perfectly done. So
Mhm.
we all, we understand that everyone's different, but there are things that are emergencies. For example, what happened? I have a couple of examples recently. One was, and it happened to be one of my employees was living in an apartment, and in the middle of the night, his ceiling was leaking because we had
Oh.
like a backup on the roof, and it was literally leaking onto his bed. I mean, it's an emergency because it has to be dealt with right away. Like, it's like, and it can get worse and worse. So that's what we do there is what my wife says, and this is really the landlord's life is like, it's you're on call 24 hours a day because
Mhm.
people are people are living in the properties, and emergencies happen. Like, an emergency happens in your own house, you got to take care of it right away. There's no
Mhm.
it is what it is. Some, to the best of your ability. Obviously, natural disasters, things like that. You sometimes it takes days to handle things like that, right? When there's no power to the whole neighborhood, what do you do? That's happened, right? Um, so you you obviously, I'm going to say the common obvious things. You try to stop the source of the problem, and then you deal with cleaning it up. You know, so immediately you try to you obviously make sure that no one's being harmed, or property is not being harmed. Um, a codicil of this conversation is, that my employee had a lot of nice things, and they got damaged from the leak above. The leak wasn't our fault. It was like leaves, collecting, and the drain didn't drain, and the roof was fine, but then it leaked because there was water that shouldn't have been in an area that shouldn't have been. Fine, but we fixed it. But his stuff got ruined, right? And 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 he's telling me, "Oh, I have these things." I'm like, honestly, you're supposed to have renters insurance. It's not expensive to have renters insurance relative to the cost of your apartment. These days, renters insurance you can buy for $200 a year, and it covers your stuff. So we had this in earlier episodes, but you're like, "Oh, what about my stuff?" And I'm like, renters should have renters insurance because it's a very low cost, and it's in the lease like that we have. It's a very low cost for you to have, and if something happens, uh, the landlord doesn't cover your stuff. Okay, so
Right.
you gotta. There's companies that do that. It's a low cost thing to have, right? So I
Mhm.
encourage everyone to have. So being attentive to the emergency, knowing that they do happen, having a protocol as far as a landlord owner. If I'm not available, I mean, I have a team of people. Like, I have a guy that's on call, and if you can't get him, you get
Mm.
somebody else. You know,
Mhm.
worst case scenario, obviously it's an emergency. You call the fire department or something like that. That's crazy, but because they
Yeah.
knock in the walls and ask questions later. You know,
Right. Like, do you have a super on call 24/7 or multiple
Yeah,
supers?
we have a rotation.
So they are on call. I didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
very interesting.
yeah, yeah, and we have weekend guys. You know, we say, okay, whose turn is it? We like go on like a rotation. Um, but yeah, I mean, these things happen, and sometimes we got to get up in the middle of the night and to deal with them.
And
I had
the
another.
chain go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you.
No, as I say, the chain of command would be the renter would call you, or they would call someone on your team, and then you would deploy a super or the professional, right?
It used to be when I had less properties, they would call me, and then now I have um, they can they the super on call gets the emergency line gets dials a super on call. We have like a system where after hours, if someone calls, it goes directly to the super. There's other people also on the in our phone system. So we have a property manager, that's supervisor, other people. So usually get a hold of somebody in pretty short order. And with a lot of my properties, my people live in and around the neighborhood. So there's always they're not far. And I don't live far either. So um, that's the way we manage things. And it's important to between landlords and residents to communicate as to, okay, look, if there's an emergency, you call this number. Then this is when who the people are. This is where they are, so that really how to get a hold of people or who's going to respond to that.